Okay, great. All right, it's 9 o'clock, so I think we're going to call this meeting of the Bricktown Urban Design Committee to order. Can we have a roll call?
Sandino Thompson.
Present.
Omar Khoury.
Present.
Jonathan Dodson.
Present.
Mark Crittenbrink. Tom Wilson.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, great. Okay, item 2 on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the January 13th meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those minutes? Any questions or concerns? Move approval. Second. All right, it's been moved and properly seconded that we approve the meeting minutes from January 13th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, that motion does carry. Number 3 is cases withdrawn. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4. And I understand we do have a continuance request.
Yes, item 6A, the EMD signs at the 3 parking lots. We're asking that it be continued to the March meeting because it was pointed out earlier this week that there was a clerical error in the SPUD that was adopted by council. That has since been administratively corrected, but we didn't want to hear this case without the committee having the amended document.
Okay. Do we need to take action on that?
Yes, we need a motion to continue it to the March meeting.
Based on that explanation, I would like to, if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to entertain a motion to continue.
Move continuance to the next meeting?
March.
To the March meeting.
Second. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we would continue this item to the March meeting, to the March committee meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, this motion does carry. Okay, we have number 5, consent docket. There are no items there. And we obviously just handled item 6A. What I would like to do, if there's no objection from the other committee members, is move item 8A. Let's move to item 8A and sort of move that up ahead of item 7, so we can consider those items. These are 4 information presentations that I think we would like to hear before we go into the ordinance conversation. Do we need to take a motion on that? Sorry. Okay. So can I get a motion to make that adjustment to the agenda?
I motion that we address communications first, number 8, and then go to 7, other business.
All right. Is there a second? All right, great. It's been moved.
I forgot there are 2 presentations.
Yes.
You want to move both of them?
Yes, we're going to move item 8.
Okay. The whole item. Okay.
Okay, so that's the motion on the floor, is to move item 8 up ahead of 7, essentially, to hear those presentations. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Or sorry, all opposed, nay? Any abstentions?
One abstention.
Okay, 1 abstention by Tom Wilson. So that motion does carry, and we will hear item 8A, presentations. Item 8A1 is Scott Dedman of ADG.
I'm Scott Dedman with ADG, 920 West Main. And we'll get this up here in a second. There we go. We were here last month to present an informational, and your input was very valuable to us. So come back this month with another informational just to see if we're moving in the right direction on this from the design committee's standpoint. So. Again, just want to talk a little bit about the site. Again, we're at the corner of Sheridan and Joe Carter on the northeast corner, and the whole site occupies two hotels. So we have the AC and we have the Hyatt Place. The Hyatt Place has already been approved. Just some of the surrounding projects that are going on that this project will be adjacent to. Of course, the Homewood Suites that has already been completed. The steel yard that's under construction, Criterion that's under construction, and the Staybridge Suites down at the end of Sheridan. So the site plan, again, I know you guys have seen this before, but I'll just show this again. So we have the AC Hotel, and it kind of interlocks with the Hyatt Place, creating a courtyard in the center. The primary entry drop-off will be on Sheridan Avenue. And one thing I'll point out on the ground floor plan, again, is that all of the front-of-house functions are facing Sheridan and Joe Carter primarily, so that we have full-height glass, storefront glass that faces the street. Now, one of the things that came out of the comments from last time was the opening up of the corner element. And your comments enabled us to be able to work with the developer to look at some options on doing that. And one thing that we did was to come back and eliminate 2 rooms, basically, to where we could create a 2-story space above the bar area. And so when you come into the hotel, this is actually a second floor plan, but you come in, you have a 2-story space in the atrium or in the entry with a bridge that goes across, an open bridge. And then as you come down into the bar area, again, that opens into a 2-story space as well. Then the 3rd through 5th floors are primarily guest rooms as we go up. So the design has changed quite a lot, and you can see primarily it is at this corner element. The floor plan's basically the same as what it was, but the corner element opens up and allows us to get much more glass, more opening to the street for the bar. This isn't a particularly good shot of that, but again, you can see the height that we get on that corner. The entry remains in the same spot. We have actually come in and we've cleaned up some materials too. One of the comments I think last time was about the use of some of the corrugated metals and things like that. So we replaced the corrugated metals with a textured brick panel that happens between the windows. And then this primary element, again, is using a textured brick where we'll inset a brick and bring a brick out so that we'll have some texture to that wall. And as you come around the corner, looking at Joe Carter, the canopy continues and creates some protection on the street so that we have the ability to have some outdoor dining space outside of the bar. And then again, the glass opens up into the 2-story space where we see decorative lighting taking place in that area. So again, that would be a very similar look to what was done at the Holiday Inn Express by the same developer. Just a close-up view. Again, with all of and we actually pushed this wall back to create more space on the street so that we could have some tables and chairs and some dining space outside. This is actually a pretty good view of the textured brick. So we have panels of the textured brick that go below. And of the main entry canopy. Now the brick itself, we're looking at probably 2 shades of brick, one a little slight shade lighter than the other, but then the use of the sort of the texturing that goes up, I think, will really help some of these elements to stand out quite a lot. So again, we're trying to create something that has a nice contemporary feel, but still respects and reflects the character of Bricktown. Of course, this is East Bricktown, so we have a little bit different character than sort of the core of Bricktown, so we think we need to approach this in a little bit different way. So we would appreciate any comments that you might have.
Okay. I don't assume there are any staff comments or anything. Any comments on that presentation from committee members?
Scott, can you go back one slide? No, you had it. What are the materials that are on the upper portion of that corner?
Right here. This is all ACM, architectural metal, composite metal.
And the dark gray as well?
Yes.
Is that actually a light gray, or is it more of a buff color?
There's more of a metallic, and then a gray, and then a white accent line that sort of lines all of between between the silver and the dark gray.
Okay.
So what we did is we went back to some of the original designs previously and tried to pick up some of the character of that was missing from the last round, and then also open that corner up considerably more than what it was. Also changed the way the signage was approached. So as opposed to one large corner element, we've broken that down into two smaller ones, one facing west, one facing south.
I like what you did with the articulation of both the Sheridan, the two avenues there, with having some setbacks and pushing some of the elements out,
Right.
rather than a flat, close to a flat surface like we had the last time.
Right.
And I think this actually probably addresses the corner a little bit better than both of the first one or the last.
I think it does,
one.
actually.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. The developer was very willing to give up 2 rooms, so we're down to 136 rooms, but to get that volume and that space and create a really nice feature on the corner. I think the Holiday Inn has been really successful in the way that lobby opens up and faces the corner. So sort of a very somewhat similar appearance.
Other questions, comments? I think I would echo some of the earlier comments. I appreciate also the increased use of the brick, and I think just a few questions on the materials just to make sure I'm clear. So the dark gray and the gray components is the ACM that you were
Yes.
talking about, and so those would kind of be your highlights. And so that's both on that corner element, but also as we come further down Sheridan, those elements are
That's
all
correct.
that
Yeah,
same.
everything that shows as a solid material would be an ACM.
Okay, and then the white column elements, what materials are those?
They're steel columns, but they're clad in a ACM.
Okay.
Architectural metal.
Okay, so that's kind of the default from the brick.
Really, yeah, it's brick or architectural metal.
Okay. I would just like to say again, I appreciate you guys' willingness to work with the committee, but also just with the district. I think this design is much improved from what you guys kind of had to put together
Great.
last time around. So I
Great.
really
Thank you.
appreciate that effort.
Well, we appreciate being able to come and make these informational presentations and get your feedback early. So I think this has worked well. Appreciate it.
Okay, I don't think there's any action that we need to take, or any further questions?
Thanks, Scott.
All right. Okay, let's see, next item on the agenda is item 8A2. It's Randy Entz, Program Planner.
Yeah, after the last meeting, or one of the past meetings, some of the committee members asked if they could get an explanation about how the process for planned unit developments work. I think this came up because of the antenna applications that we heard a couple months ago and the parking lot EMD sign. So Randy Entz is a program planner in our division, and one of his core jobs is to review PUDs and SPUDs and make the recommendations to Planning Commission. I'll also take this opportunity to introduce a couple of other people. Sarah Welch is a senior planner in our division. She also works on PUD and SPUD reviews. She also was very involved in pulling together the ordinance amendment that we're going to review after this. Also, I don't know if we introduced Sharita Bryce. Is this your first time at this meeting? Okay. Sharita is a new administrative coordinator with our department, and she is back up to Paula. I know it's hard to imagine Paula might not be at a meeting. She might actually have a day off.
Let's not speak of that.
Yeah, so Sharita is, you'll see her somewhat frequently as she makes sure she knows the ropes. Anyway, so Randy has put together just a presentation of how it all works, and he'll answer any questions.
All right, thank you. As she said, I'm Randy Ince in the Planning Department. I am going to give you a quick overview of PUDs and SPUDs and how the city uses those. Real quickly, planned unit development, affectionately known as a PUD, or a simplified planned unit development, they're specialized zoning districts. And I want you to keep in mind that they're specialized, but they also become a part of the zoning ordinance once they're approved. So they are ordinance controlled. They're intended to maximize the flexibility and to allow some flexibility in land, the way land is designed and developed. It includes the typical controls regarding density, setbacks, building heights, signs, things of that nature. But they typically also include things like building materials and pedestrian circulation and protection of environmental assets, things of that nature. PUDs are, it's separated by size generally. PUDs are 5 acres or greater. SPUDs are less than 5 acres. Because PUDs are much larger in scale, they typically provide a lot more information. The goals and objectives of PUDs, and this is straight out of the ordinance pretty much, they want to minimize the impact of the development on neighbors, promote infill that's compatible with the surrounding area, meet the city's visions for the area as expressed in plans, policies, and other regulations, and provide better development than the standard zoning process would. Because of the flexibility that PUDs and SPUDs allow, typically they provide amenities above and beyond what is normally required. And that's what, with this pedestrian circulation and protection of environmental assets, or increasing the quality of building materials, things of that nature. And the approval is a negotiated process between the city and the applicant. So, a little bit of give and take. In design districts, the first review typically is by the design committee, a committee such as this. What you typically see a SPUD or PUD for is to add in a land use. You already have a lot of design controls which govern how things are developed, but a lot of times land uses need to be added or removed from a certain area. A good case in point are the antennas. That's not an allowed use in Bricktown. A SPUD was used to allow those antennas to add that use in. I think you'll see antennas get added into the Bricktown ordinance, so you won't have to have a SPUD just for that use anymore. Design review staff provides information, and the committee provides a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission takes that recommendation into account and considers it along with input from staff. Staff input includes the review of the development to ensure its conformance with the comprehensive plan. It's also a review from other departments, including traffic, public works, fire, utilities. Planning Commission then makes a recommendation to City Council of approval or denial, which is where the ultimate decision is made of the approval or the denial. Council considers all kinds of factors. The recommendation from the previous committees are just a couple of those factors. Throughout the process, surrounding property owners within 300 feet are notified of the proposal before the Planning Commission and City Council hearings. Once the PUD or SPUD is approved by Council, it becomes the guiding language or the ordinance that is how the site will be developed. That is why staff tries to encourage design district review and the requirements of these districts be included in the SPUD or PUD. This means the design review committee will eventually see the project again, and once again there's public notice at that stage. Overall, the process takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months. A lot of times it takes longer, depending on how long the negotiations take. So, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions on the presentation?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Maybe. Yeah.
So after the ordinance is approved by council, it will automatically return to the committee for review?
The ordinance doesn't, but once the development plans come in, they return to the design review committee to be approved, just like you typically would, but they're approved against that new ordinance language. Okay. So that is the design controls for it then.
Very good. Thank you.
Is that typical use, or is that actually built into how we do SPUDs and PUDs?
That's built into how we do these in the design districts. Okay. We try to include that language to make them go back through for.
There's an ordinance provision somewhere in the zoning code that says properties within design review districts should remain in design review districts. So that's consistent
You can't use the
for,
PUD or SPUD to remove yourself from the design
Right.
district.
you have to stay in.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
One quick question. So when the ordinance is created, that pretty much sets the tone for what they can do within that PUD or SPUD.
Yes.
Unless they change that, that's the only reason it comes back to the design district?
You still review the eventual development plans, but you review them against that set of language in the SPUD. So the setbacks, the materials, anything that was included in that SPUD is what you will then be reviewing it against.
The EMD sign that helped kind of provoke some of the concerns that we had on the board, was that brought back to us to vote?
That's what was continued today.
Okay, that's what was
Well,
continued.
no, the signs that are allowed under that SPUD were in this application that's been continued to March.
Okay.
You didn't see the SPUD again, as I think several people are aware. The SPUD changed after the committee approved it. It changed kind of at the council level in some good ways when Randy was talking about, part of the SPUD and PUD process is a negotiation. And within the final SPUD, the signs were smaller than originally conceived. Bricktown review was put in, and some limits, some language about Bricktown Association signs and when they would run, brightness controls, all that kind of stuff was incorporated in the final version.
Yeah, and to clarify, it was disapproved by the committee.
This committee.
Correct.
Yeah.
It was recommended for
Yeah.
denial
Yeah.
by
Recommended
this
for denial.
committee.
So
Council ultimately approved it, though.
But council ultimately approved it. But council didn't approve the version that
That we
this
saw.
committee, they approved the version with the text about when the Bricktown messages could run to confirm that they were going to get some prime time.
Yeah.
There are some exceptions, like, for example, the SPUDs that get approved for the antennas. The antennas aren't coming back to the committee because they're considered to be an administrative type level approval, and they wouldn't come back. So some of these minor things that get approved through a SPUD process do end up getting approved with a CA that's done administratively by staff.
But to your point, it's the same process. It's still coming through the same
They
design
still
review
have to get a
process.
CA, yes.
Yeah.
So I have another question. We did not approve the original SPUD. It went through modifications, went through council. We are not reviewing the SPUD again. We're reviewing the application under the SPUD. Okay, thank you.
I don't think we ever reviewed the SPUD. It was just an application to put up the EM.
Yeah, there was an application for the MDs, which was not approved. But then there was a recommendation, requested of the committee on the SPUD application when it came through, and that was, we recommended denial of that. And that's the thing. There was also recommended denial at Planning Commission.
Yeah,
So there have been both those things.
Both of them
come
come
before us last year. Well, does anybody else have questions? Okay. So a couple of things that I was curious about. So the value, you kind of spoke to the value of these plan unit developments versus ordinance changes, but it also seems like in context in sort of say a design districts, a lot of areas around downtown, around the city core versus maybe Class and Curve, some of the other examples you used, the Chisholm Creek development, I think those are both plan unit developments. Can you explain the differing value? Because we also obviously have an ordinance process as well. And this actually goes through a planning. The plan unit developments go through a planning process. Why wouldn't we just update our ordinances to specify particular areas or particular dynamics? Or is that in fact what this is for?
That is essentially what a PUD does for, or a SPUD does for a piece of property, is it changes the ordinance for that piece of property. So it tries to be flexible and allow for context. Particularly with infill projects, or sometimes you see it on the edge in the greenfield projects, that there are certain uses that aren't allowed that might be acceptable if they were presented in a certain way, if they were buffered in a certain way or screened, that traditional zoning just doesn't accommodate well. So by allowing the PUD, you can increase densities, you can increase setbacks, things of that nature that make a project work now that we can't just blanketly cover the city with and kind of adjust for at the parcel level. So that's why they're so valuable.
Okay, and then I guess then the difference between how the plan unit developments are applied in design districts versus those other areas of the city. So the use case in the design districts would be really to sort of to call out or improve a particular proposed development or particular parcels of land that were proposed to develop within that. Because it would seem also that the design district sort of guidelines make some allowance for some of the things that a PUD is essentially hoping to do.
Right. Like I said, the design districts already have pretty good standards in place to control good design or design that's appropriate for that area. The PUDs typically in the design districts are because of one-off uses that aren't included. That might be appropriate if done correctly. They just weren't addressed at the time the ordinance was created for that design district. So the antennas is the perfect case of that.
Right, because we couldn't think of one SPUD or PUD in downtown, because downtown, the base zoning already has so many design controls and so many permitted uses that it's already, the quality design has already been taken care of.
Okay. Are there other questions on the presentation from the committee members? Okay. I appreciate you coming and speaking with us today.
Thanks, Randy.
All right. So at this point, I believe we will move back to item 7A, ordinance amendment. We have a presentation for that.
Yes. At long last, we have brought back a comprehensive set of code revisions with new regulations and guidelines and amended text for the committee to consider a recommendation to the Planning Commission and then on to the City Council. We've been working on this since probably middle part of 2013, and I think we were prepared to bring this to you at one point, or getting close to being prepared to bring this to you at one point near the end of 2014 or early 2015, and at that point we were tasked with the responsibility of trying to work into these regulations some of the input that we were receiving from the Downtown Development Framework document, and because that was a work in progress, we worked on that team to kind of sort out what from that document should be absorbed in this document as regulation and what should be absorbed and incorporated as a guideline. And that took a little bit more time than we anticipated. And then as a result of the efforts that were taken on last year to bring the DDF to the applicable design committees and then on to the Planning Commission and City Council, we worked to, as the document was adopted, to bring those provisions into the document. And I think you can see from the volume of text you have here now compared to what you may have seen in previous iterations of this, I think this is a more complete package. It's also, we've provided you with a document that summarizes the changes. It's about 8 pages long as compared to the entire document, which is 86 pages long. This is probably more in a full format, like ready to be adopted once it is recommended by both this committee and the Planning Commission and City Council. So, again, this is the most complete iteration of these regulation updates that we've presented to the committee. We hope that you've had a chance to go through it. It is quite a bit of material to cover. We weren't necessarily anticipating a recommendation today. We're prepared to take this as many meetings as it takes to get the committee comfortable with what they feel is appropriate for the changes going forward to the Planning Commission and City Council. I'm going to, at the committee's discretion, going to run through as briefly as possible, I think, the summary, point by point, kind of overviewing each of the sections of changes that we have before you. And we're prepared to respond to any comments or questions the committee may have about a particular change or revision at the end of that. So the first few changes relate primarily to the sign code. This is probably not something that we've addressed in quite some time with respect to Bricktown. I know that in the last update, which was 2012, we did not make any changes to the sign code, but as you are all aware, we have seen in the past 3 years a lot of issues come up with respect to signage in Bricktown, so we wanted to try and make an attempt, at least in this update, to try and address some of the concerns we've seen. In Chapter 383, we've made some changes that add text to clarify that EMD signs are subject to any specific EMD regulations and guidelines in the design districts. In 3-102, we are adding the BC district to an exemption from the standards from this section because it applies to a whole separate set of sign regulations, and BC does not belong in that set. In 3-102, which is where the bulk of the major changes are taking place, we've basically kind of reorganized the sign section that pertains specifically to the BC district, patterning it after the other sign regulations that apply to other design districts and other zoning classifications, so that we're kind of matching the way that the code section is laid out. And beyond that, we are being more specific about the prohibited types of signs, and specifying that there are signs allowed for residential uses, because right now the code does not recognize residential use in Bricktown, and obviously we're seeing that we have some there already, and we're seeing more coming online. It gets into a lot of detail about the number of signs allowed, and starts reorganizing the section that talks about the maximum display surface area and temporary banners. We also get into specifics with respect to EMD signs and limiting the uses that are able to utilize EMD signs. And we've relocated some other text changes from other sections into this document. And then finally, in the sign code, top of page 2 of your summary, we're modifying section 3-119, and that is one that currently talks a lot about non-accessory signage, and we want to be very specific with respect to non-accessory signage in the BC district, and so we've put some regulations in there that we feel are appropriate to limit the amount or the type of non-accessory signage that we do allow in that district. Moving on, we've moved into section 59, or article 59.
Excuse me. I
Yes.
think we have a question.
Would you like to have some questions now, or you want to go through the whole thing?
We can take questions now.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
have a quick question about signs. On the temporary signs, is there a limitation to the duration that they're allowed? I know I'm asking you to look at small print.
Well, it'll take some time for me to find that
That's
section.
okay.
My guess is the answer is yes.
Yeah,
as we,
If we're not forced, we don't need to approve this today, is that correct?
Correct.
No, and can I make a comment? Yeah, my preference would be, because I've had a chance to look at the summary, I haven't had a chance to dive into this, so I would prefer not to approve it today, but to take some time, so long as that doesn't negatively impact staffs.
You're off the hook. Great.
I think the temporary sign portion was modeled off of downtown,
Right.
which is, it's like the thunder banners, and you can have It's good for like 60
days,
days,
yes.
and you can only do it 3 or 4 times a year with a certain gap in between.
Great, thank you.
Michael, since we're doing the questions in the middle of your presentation, can we go back to the AMD signs, number 5? Is this based on, are we not allowing non-accessory signs, AMD non-accessory signs? Because this just talks about accessory signs only.
Well, the issue is, I think, and municipal council's office can back us up on this, EMD signs are problematic because once you approve them, content regulation is very difficult. And I don't think we recognize the fact that once you have an EMD sign, it's pretty much content exempt. So that's why we've restricted the use of them to certain uses and limited the size of those signs. So we recognize that there are certain uses in the district where an EMD sign would be a logical application of the sign code. And in that, we also recognize that there's an opportunity there and a chance that some of the content of that sign may be non-accessory.
Yeah, and I tend to think, I mean, for the reasons that Michael stated, that we're probably better off dealing with those cases on an individual basis than trying to deal with them here, where you can do exceptions to allow for the non-accessory use.
If there is a time where a PUD or a SPUD actually is approved and it is contradictory to other ordinances, I'm assuming that PUD or SPUD overrides the ordinance. If it does not address an ordinance that is within, if an ordinance is not addressed within the PUD or SPUD, can that then override what happens there within the PUD or the SPUD?
I don't.
If I think I understand what you're saying, because I think I understand where you're coming from. You're asking about if the PUD or the SPUD only applies to the language specifically in there.
Okay.
All the other elements of an ordinance that don't contradict or that conform to it are still in effect.
Okay.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
That's
Yes.
So if there are no other questions there, then I'm going to proceed on to Article 59, which is the meat of what Bricktown is typically regulated under. It's actually the planning and zoning provisions for Bricktown. Under definitions, we're adding a definition for clear zone, and that's directly from the DDF, another aspect of updating the code to reflect that information. One of the major changes I think that we're considering here, and asking for your support on, is to increase the membership of the committee from 5 to 7. Presently, of the 5 members, 3 are required to be tenants or property owners within the district, and at times that can create issues and concerns with respect to conflicts of interest or quorums. And we feel that by expanding it from 5 to 7, we can at least hope to try and alleviate some of those problems, and we're recommending that the 2 new members not necessarily have any specific ties to the Bricktown area in terms of property ownership or tenancy, and that way that would help also with respect to the conflict of interest aspect of that. We are making some minor changes to the terms of office. That's primarily to bring that provision in line with the same provisions for other design district committees and commissions. We're making some minor refinements to the text that talks about removal of members, and again, that is to reflect and to match text in other district sections of the same topic. Minor revision to the vacancies provision. In Section 4150, we're making some changes that correct the reference to the Oklahoma Open Meeting Act. In the section on public examination, the copying applications and other documents, we're again correcting the reference to the Oklahoma Open Records Act. In conduct of public hearing, right now it only mentions commissions, and we felt it was appropriate to include the word committee in there as well to address this committee as well as 3 other committees we have that do design review in the city. In section 4250.6, we're deleting the words "and purpose" because purpose is not discussed in the current text of that section. We're specifying in section 4250.6 that the Bricktown Urban Design Committee reviews CAs for properties that are within the district, just to be perfectly straightforward and clear about what your purview is. We're making a series of minor revisions in section 4250.6 C, D, and E. Basically, again, we're trying to remodel this section on the same type of sections that applies to other design districts, and so we're trying to match format essentially for the most part through here. Don't think there's anything really significant in that section to
There's
discuss.
the item about artistic graphics toward the bottom of page 3. Right now, there are definitions for murals and definitions for artistic graphics, and it's become extremely clear internally that there's virtually no difference, and the difference that there is extremely confusing. So we're just going to remove artistic graphics, and anything artistically graphic will be evaluated according to the mural standards.
The other significant thing that we are doing in that section is we're reducing the amount of extensions that can be obtained from, presently it's 4, and we're reducing that to 2.
Is
And
it continuances? Is that what we're talking about?
well, the CAs are good. The initial CA approvals are good for 2 years.
I see.
And right now you can get 4 2-year extensions, so that'd be 10 years total. And we feel it's important to tone that down, bring that back in more of a realm of respectability and rational time frame, so that we feel that we don't want to basically grandfather an approval for 10 years out. This way, if rules change in the meantime, that we can limit the amount of extensions that we're granting.
Michael?
Yes.
I have forgotten, is that to completion of the project or to initiation of the project?
It's to completion of the project.
Okay.
So it would go from 10 years to 6. Moving on into section 7150.1, which is the heart of the Bricktown district in terms of what requires a CA, what doesn't require a CA, and what the regulations and guidelines are. One of the significant changes, and this again is from the DDF, is that we're kind of subdividing the BC district into East Bricktown and West Bricktown. And the purpose of that is that it's felt, at least through the DDF, that it's been adopted and recommended for approval and adopted by this committee, that there is a difference between the core, which is considered to be the west part of Bricktown, and the eastern part of Bricktown, in that the core is kind of where the bulk of the historic old warehouse buildings are, and it creates a certain sense and aesthetic that we want to maintain and preserve, whereas outside that district we can see some relaxation of some of the rules. We're increasing the building height, we're increasing the building footprint, the building lot coverage, and I think we're also looking at a little bit more broad interpretation of the materials that can be used in the east part of Bricktown as opposed to the core.
Is that consistent with the, we had a little workshop, I think, some time ago with planning staff, where it did very good comments and sort of presentation on massing and that kind of thing. Is that kind of what we're...
Yeah, the biggest thing, the biggest thing that came out of that workshop is the committee expressed a desire to kind of keep the height limits that we have currently, and that's the maximum height limit as is. The distinction that you see between West Bricktown and East Bricktown with regard to height is that there's a minimum building height that we're looking at now, and we're saying that in the east part of Bricktown, we'd like to maybe see that minimum height go higher than it is in the west part.
Right. Thank you.
We, again, the second change listed there, Section B, we're, again, moving things around. There's a lot of that going on in the document, and again, that's really more to model format from the way that other sections are laid out, so that we have some consistency between the way the design districts are presented. In the Section C that talks about where certificates of approval are required, where we have a section that talks about what the committee reviews, and then following that a section that talks about administrative approvals that staff can do. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do to make it perfectly clear to both sides of the coin is we're introducing reciprocal language on both sides, so that it's clear that there's a flip side on both sets of regulations. In other words, if we've said that staff can approve a certain thing at one level in the second section, we want to make sure that that is reflected in the first section, so people don't gloss over it and think, oh, I can do this without getting approval. So it's really just a kind of representation of making sure that both sides of the coin are reflected in both the committee section and the staff level administrative section. For the most part, that's what's going on in that section. We're just kind of clarifying and revising text to make sure that everybody's understanding what we're laying out there. And then in the administrative approval, which is top of page 5 of your summary, there's also some of that, and we've added some new provisions that we feel are appropriate to include under administrative approval, such as driveways, bike racks, waste receptacles, and retaining walls. For the most part, that's a kind of a clear summary of what's happening in that section. We are, again, in Section D, deleting references to artistic graphics and turning everything back toward murals. So that's all consistently referred to. That's what they're referred to in other districts as well. So we're focusing on using that as the one category for artistic graphics or for pictures on walls, basically. We are permitting home occupations within the BC district. Again, that's a reflection of the fact that I don't think in the past that residences were recognized in the district, and now that we do have residences there, it's only fair to allow people that live in those units to do home occupations the same as they would in any other design district or area outside a design district in the city. There's also some clarifications there to what accessory uses are allowed, one of them being swimming pools, and that right now is not allowed, although we are and have allowed some of the hotels to have swimming pools, because obviously they need to have those. And I believe the residential project on the south side of Reno, well, that's outside the district, but I think it has a pool too. I'm not sure.
That's what I was going to ask. In fact, I mean, prior to the things that have been sort of proposed here recently, was there any residential in the Bricktown Design District? That's not a trivia question, but just I can't think of anything.
Well, we just have the Steel Yard project.
Right, which I'm saying, which would be a recent project. It's
Yeah.
not completed yet.
No, aside from that, there are none on the books approved. I know that the Brewers are talking about perhaps converting some of their upper stories to residential, but that has not been done yet. And in fact, if it's just interior remodeling to accommodate that, they may not have to get a CA to do that. So,
But we're essentially anticipating those uses, which I think is prudent.
yes. Moving over into the district bulk regulations, we have a series of changes. And again, here we're talking about the minimum building height that I was referring to earlier in West Bricktown versus East Bricktown. And then we are talking again here about the fact that we do have a guideline, just like under the current regulations, a guideline that recommends that 80-foot height limit that allows up to 140 by regulation. And then we're also talking again about the difference between the lot coverage in East Bricktown and West Bricktown, and there is a provision there for that no more than 15% of a first floor elevation be allowed for access to a vehicular parking garage in a structure, so that if you have a space that's 100 feet long, you'd get 15 feet of that space to be allowed for vehicular access. And again, that is a regulation, so you'd need a variance to do something more than that.
That might be something that we want to take a look at. I think the presentation on the parking garage that ADG presented last month or the month before, almost 50% of the ground floor was reserved. It's a very large building site, so there is almost all of the street frontage was retail. So I'm not sure whether this is referring to the entire ground floor or just the linear dimension of it.
It'd be the elevation where the access occurs. So
Okay,
it
so
wouldn't be the...
it's just the linear dimension of the street.
Right.
Because you're saying on the parking garage, all of the ingress and egress was on the east side to keep it off of... East and south, to keep it off of Sheridan. So you're saying in the effort to keep it off of Sheridan, it might be over the 15%.
Could be. In this particular case, since I now understand how you're defining that, let's say you had a 25-foot wide townhouse. You would clearly exceed the 15% rule. So we might, since this is, I guess since this is a regulation, we might want to think of ways to create some exceptions so they don't have to go through a variance process on this.
Right, or we could look at moving it to a guideline. The intent is obviously to minimize disruption on the street.
And we need to look up, we think that might come from the DDF, but perhaps not, and I didn't bring a copy of the DDF with me to find out and verify that, but even if it is from the DDF, the committee has the opportunity to make adjustments to that and convert it from regulation to a guideline, or leave it as a regulation and make adjustments to it that make it more palatable. Obviously, when you have a rectangular piece of land where you have a long frontage on one side and a much shorter frontage on another, that could be this regulation could be a real constraint for that.
In a case
that
that
type of
might be
site.
preferential, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me just for the record make a statement that Dodson did have to leave.
Yeah, I might make one other comment. What we're looking at doing at the First National Center, the place where we would ingress and egress there would take up 75% of the face of that building. So as long as there's a way that we can go through this and not require particularly smaller applicants to go through the...
You could always do a spud.
We could do a spud.
Way to go.
That would be a way to get around this regulation, wouldn't it?
Create much ire.
I will choose not to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though. Something I definitely want to take a bigger look at myself when I'm doing this.
The last part of that section is basically, those 4 bulleted items are provisions that were identified as items that should be brought into the code as regulations, so they've been brought into the regulatory table for the Bricktown district. In the use table, we've made some revisions there as well, and again, we're back on the artistic graphics and deleting reference to that. We're also adding communication services antennas, so that will alleviate the ability or the need for us to entertain SPUD applications for those facilities in the future. One of the things that we got input from the Bricktown Association was that they wanted to have the clubs subject to the same ABC regulations as everybody else throughout the city, and that's one of the changes we're proposing to make here. It would affect all the ABC3 uses that are out there today, and would only come into play for those existing users if they were to let the license lapse or to try to sell it.
So can you just expound on that just a little bit, as what's different now?
Right now, it's essentially allowed as a permitted use by right without any type of review or oversight. This would put it in the same classification as all the other ABC3 processes, which means that they have to go through
Apply,
ABLE
public
and go
notice
to
and
Planning
all those
Commission
things.
and City Council to get approval for those. Here we've added murals to replace the deletion to the artistic graphics reference, and then we've made some minor reorganizations because there are some things that were in the table currently that are out of order, either sequentially or alphabetically. In Section E, we relocated the development regulations from D to E, and again, this is a consistency in format type of a change. We are referencing building frontages per the DDF, providing clarification that BC is exempt from the parking requirements as it presently is. We're requiring irrigation and landscaping, whereas right now there is no requirement for that. That's pretty much a match from what's required right now under the DVD and DTD1 and DTD2. Same goes for sidewalk requirements. We currently have no regulations that require sidewalks improvements in the BC district, and again, we're matching the downtown regulations there. We're making reference to Chapter 3 for sign regulations. I believe we also made a change to, we were, I guess, getting rid of the provisions for outdoor storage because it's not listed as a permitted use. And then moving into Section F, that is, I would say, pretty much the heart of where the bulk of the changes you're going to see in this document are occurring. We spent a lot of time and taken a lot of care to try and come up with new sets of guidelines, and everything in Section F is a guideline, not a regulation, to first of all, I guess, adopt and adapt some provisions that we have in the downtown core districts and try and meld them into how they would be applicable in the BC district. And then furthermore, we have brought some new provisions in, such as fences and trash rooms, and we've obviously carried over the recently adopted demolition requirements that were adopted last year. I think one of the big things that we're doing in that section, and I think this is one of the reasons that initial reasons that we took on this task of updating the regulations, is that we heard from the committee that there was a lot of concern about the restrictions on building materials and how newer buildings shouldn't necessarily have to mimic the old style 100% of the Bricktown warehouse design format, and that there was a need, I think, to loosen the rules up a little bit and give the committee latitude to consider contemporary design elements and contemporary building materials. And we think we've done that in these changes.
And primarily, those changes are outlined in which section?
Well, they would be
In this F?
in F, yeah, F, and primarily in F2, and primarily in F2 is where you'll find a lot of language that gives you broader latitude with respect to more contemporary building materials and contemporary design treatments or elements. I think clearly the AC Hotel has a much more contemporary look to it than what you would find if you tried to model it after a Bricktown warehouse that's in the core area.
And so to go along with that, I guess those elements would apply to both the east and west Bricktown distinction.
I believe there's a certain distinction that allows it more so in the East Bricktown area than in the West, but again, these are all guidelines, so there's a lot of latitude for the committee either way. In a new table we've added, which is table 7150.3, we've brought in to the Bricktown regulations, the pedestrian zone design guidelines, and that's a table that it's a very small table, but it includes a series of features such as the storefront pedestrian zone, the high-intensity pedestrian zone, and the boulevard pedestrian zone, and gives direction as to the minimum width of each of these kinds of these zones that are considered for the front door of new development in the Bricktown core, or actually throughout the BC district. We have made some changes in sections G through J, pretty much redefining, eliminating the outdoor storage requirement or provisions. And those were design guidelines that spoke to how you were supposed to accommodate and screen outdoor storage, and we realized that when we look at the use table, outdoor storage is not a permitted use, so we eliminated that.
Michael, is refrigerated storage outside storage? I mean, I don't know what the definition of outside storage is.
No. Those would typically be accommodated as additions to buildings that would more than likely be required to be screened or wrapped in the same material as the building itself. So it definitely wouldn't be considered outdoor. I think if you're talking about somehow an accessory structure that provides refrigeration, I'm not sure how that would be addressed. We've taken some of the information that we have in the current code regarding paint on masonry structures and redistributed it into the guidelines. I think currently we have provisions that talk about what types of paint jobs can be administrative versus having to come to committee, and they specify paint color. We didn't feel it was appropriate for that paint color to be located in that section. I felt it was more appropriate in the actual guidelines section, so that's how we still refer to these colors in the section that talks about CAs and what goes to committee and what goes to staff, but the actual reference to the colors has been moved out of that section into the actual guidelines. Again, we're making a deletion or making changes, converting over from artistic graphic references to murals. And then in a table for accessory uses in buildings, we're making changes to make it clear that home occupations are allowed here in BC District as they are anywhere else where there are residences allowed. Updating some references for fence regulations, actually fence guidelines in this section, and then we're adding the BC District to the list of zoning districts eligible to have ABC as an overlay district. And that is the end of an 8-page summary of an 86-page document. So I know it's a lot of material to absorb, and again, We had no expectation that the committee would be prepared to take action on this today. As we have said in the past when we brought previous drafts of this document to you, we are more than happy to speak with you individually with regard to any questions or comments you may have about the changes, and hope that we can get this document to a point where the committee is comfortable with it either by the March or April meeting, so we can move it forward to the Planning Commission and have it adopted perhaps later this summer.
All right, because after this committee recommends it for approval, it'll go to some pre-meetings for Planning Commission before it goes to Planning Commission, and then there's 3 meetings at council. So the sooner
We gotta do the
this
meetings,
committee,
have the meetings, plan the
recommends approval, the sooner we can get on that schedule. But I just want to echo Michael's point about Michael and I, Sarah, Randy, will meet with however many people, however many times, for whatever length we need to meet to make sure everybody understands and is supportive of everything in here.
So that's a good point. First, I want to say thanks for everybody who's been involved in the process. I mean, this is a pretty comprehensive, significant, deep dive, and I think, at least in the period of time that I've served on the committee, you guys have captured a lot of the conversation that we've had into the document, so I appreciate that. I think for the sake of the committee, like I said, I personally hadn't had a chance to really dive deep into it. In thinking about that, are we interested? Do we have enough questions where we might want to try and plan something between now and our next committee meeting to kind of go more through the minute details, or do we feel comfortable just sort of going to the next meeting maybe with a more thorough review of the document and maybe more questions at that time?
From my cursory review, I only see 1 or 2 things that I think merit further consideration, and I voiced those this morning. I may come up with some more, but quite honestly, I kind of doubt it. I think it's a wonderful document. I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into it.
I have the same feelings as Tom, but when you do have a case that comes up that you can look at it and bounce it off of this document. For example, the SPUD that was continued for next month, their signage is basically an accessory and a non-accessory signage. But if you weigh that against the document, now I don't know what the SPUD says. Depending on the distance from the curb or from the property line, those two contradict themselves when you weigh them against that particular piece. But if the SPUD says, hey, it's going to be 25 feet from the curb, then that's what it is. But those are the comments I made earlier today, and that is probably the only thing that I've got going.
I think one thought specifically in that is, and maybe even why I would personally have some interest in making sure that the staff is able to stay on their timeline, is I think incorporating this and sort of strengthening this document and updating it is hopefully going to help to give a level of consistency to the conversation that happens around those kinds of things. So we don't end up with that kind of discourse happening when we do have these one-off uses coming up. Maybe this document is better able to at least address and give some guidelines that will carry up to, planning department if that's where it goes, or planning commission, or to the city council as well. I think that's part of the hope.
So I just want to clarify, Omar, were you asking if we could eliminate SPUDs forever from Bricktown? Is that what you were asking?
Can we take action on that? I don't know. Okay, sorry. Okay. Any other questions for staff on the presentation?
Follow up on what you were saying. I think you were offering a workshop, asking everybody if they needed a workshop, and we need just a little bit of notice.
Well, I think it sounds like
If
for those who are present, I think we feel comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with their thoughts. I'll dive into this, and I don't mind reaching out to you guys if I had a few questions.
Okay, great.
But I think
and I'm going to reach out to Jonathan and
Mark.
make sure, and Mark, and see if they need, if we need to repeat this discussion.
Sure. And if for the sake of those who were not present or had to leave early, I'm happy to be involved in a workshop if they feel the need to do so. But I think
So if we have comments in March, would we be, assuming that they're not major issues, is that something that we could then vote on? You think you could make the modifications for April?
Yeah, or if they're very minor, it could be recommended approval with
that?
with
Okay.
the change, you know.
All right.
That could be possible, but
So my suggestion would be that we address this in the March meeting, and if there's significant issues, maybe then we need a separate meeting to go over it with you.
Okay. So I think at that point, if there are any other questions or clarity, go ahead.
I did want to point out one other thing. We did try really hard to try and capture comments and concerns that the committee has expressed on various projects and various issues over the last 3 years. And so I did want to point out that this request to you goes beyond just questions and comments of what's in the document that we prepared for you. If you think there's something in here that we've missed that we need to address, we're more than willing to listen to you and come up with something to address those concerns as well, because, like I said, we tried to capture everything that you've been talking to us about over the last 3 years. But if there's something we missed, and we'd like to try and accommodate that as well. So,
Great. So I think I would entertain.
I do have one quick
Okay,
question
go ahead.
for Michael concerning Tom's favorite subjects, SPUDs and PUDs. When they're written, who is reviewing them against the guidelines for that particular district that they're written for?
well, the SPUD that was on the agenda that got continued today, we reviewed it against the regulations that are in that approved SPUD, and the fact of the matter is we didn't really have the most accurate and current up-to-date version of it, but with respect to this particular application, it's really design-based primarily as opposed to content of the sign base or timing of the sign base, and that was, I guess, the main issue that was missing from the SPUD that we had and give to you in your packet. So I'm not sure how much that would have weighed in our recommendation, but the bottom line is what that SPUD says is what the law of the land is per se for those signs that were approved pursuant to that SPUD.
Right, but while it's written, I know it went through Planning Commission and it was rewritten. Were you guys involved in?
No. Once we convey your recommendation on the SPUD to the zoning department, it's pretty much the zoning department that takes it forward to the Planning Commission, and we do have staff here that works on that aspect of it once it leaves here, but I, as a planner for your design district, am typically not involved in any further discussions. And I know a lot of what happened when this particular SPUD came out of concern and discussions that were raised by the Bricktown Association. And they saw an opportunity for some, I guess, district-based signage there, and they also had concerns about the way some of the signs were presented, and they, despite a recommendation for denial from this body and the recommendation for denial from the Planning Commission, there were concerns that it might get approved at the council level, and they felt it was appropriate to get themselves involved in making sure that if it were approved, that it at least had some protections and changes made that, in their eyes, made it better for the district.
Yeah, I can add, because I participated in the conversation, participated in a lot of the conversation, and probably say some things that Michael wouldn't, but I think it was a reluctant acceptance that although the SPUD had been denied, if it was going to be approved by council as stood, then it would be worse than if it was approved by council with some compromise in place. So that's the document that you're going to see as far as what is the sort of law of the land, is a document that does have feedback from Bricktown Association primarily and other stakeholders in Bricktown on some level of compromise for this SPUD regulating the signage for those parking lots. So that's what you'll see. That doesn't necessarily mean that there was consensus, I think, which is a little different, because that's how maybe it's trying to be spent, that there was consensus that this is what should have took place, or that kind of thing.
My biggest concern is not necessarily for EMD signs, but SPUD in general. If I wanted to build a building that did not really conform to what the Bricktown district guidelines would be, and I wrote a SPUD, is there anybody that's reviewing that against the guidelines that we have, so that
Yes.
it's not the law of the land anymore?
Well, when we present the SPUD to the committee, and all SPUDs have to come to this committee first before they go on to Planning Commission or City Council, we break down that SPUD against the current regulations, and we tell you where it is a violation under current regulations, and explain to you why it's an issue with respect to the current regulations or guidelines.
But once it leaves, if we deny it and it leaves this particular
That's correct.
area,
Yes.
you guys have no...
I'm not sure, are our staff reports?
Yeah, please.
Hi, Sarah Welch, Planning Department. I just want to say that with PUD and SPUDs, staff always recommends that the base zoning district of that PUD or SPUD is your design district. We don't want people to zone out of your design district, and we wanted to maintain that base zoning. So as a SPUD goes through, Michael will compare, and it's obvious if people are trying to either choose a different zoning district or vary the conditions of your BC district. So even if it goes through the process and gets approved at City Council, that base zoning district, except for as amended, is what will govern the project when it comes through to you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I think you'll see that with that proposal when it comes up. I mean, it's specifically around the EMD use of those non-accessory signs, et cetera. Everything else about that project sort of has to conform outside of the specific uses that are called out. So that there's a level of specificity there.
Okay.
Where it's not like we're taking those parking lots, for instance, and they're sort of in their own, and they're out on their own someplace. It's really with respect to those specific use cases. So like if a building came up on that same site, that non-accessory use of that sign might still come into play. I think with the language, it might be tough to pull that off even with the way the language is, because it's pretty specific, but the building itself would still come through the same review process. Okay. Other comments, thoughts? So I don't think we have to take action on this, but I do agree with Tom's sort of thought. I think we would look to the next meeting to bring back some comments, et cetera, and see how far we can come along there, and definitely try and get it on March if things go well, or April if we have some additional work that we need to do. Okay? Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Where are we at on the agenda now? We have 7A. 8 is done. So now we're at item 8B, administrative approval reports. There are none. 8C, comments from planning department staff. Any additional comments from staff? Okay. 8D is comments from committee members. Any additional comments from committee members? I did have one question that, and I thought about this because I think I had maybe missed 1 or 2 meetings at the end of last year. What happened with I think it's Club 115, the building that got painted in the midst of the night or something, and we had talked with the individual who was going to try, I guess a new owner or a new operator was coming on board to try and propose fixing that or cleaning it up. Did that get resolved?
The committee pretty much gave discretion to staff to go ahead and approve the colors based on one of the options they had presented, and we did go ahead and approve that certificate of approval. The CA is good for 2 years, so he can take as much time as he chooses, although I would imagine that the citation that he initially received is still pending, so I would hope that there's still a little bit of fire under him to make that change and get that citation invalidated.
Okay.
And the gist of the approval was a red brick, brownish red field color with some of the black accent, not the top and not the verticals, but around the base, but essentially a red brick paint, not the gray that's on there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. Let's see, we have there are no other comments from committee members. We have item 8E, which is next meeting date, March 9th, 2016. Let's see here. I think we're ready to adjourn. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All right. I think we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.